It is the 13th day of December 2014. Many thanks for joining us on Ebru Africa Saturday Primetime News. It is always a pleasure to have you tuned in, and of course, we do hope you are well from wherever you're watching us from. My name is Akisa Wandera, and we have a comprehensive bulletin lined up for you. But first, let's see what made it to the headlines.
Without creating a new law, we rationalize existing legislation.
Security laws. New security laws seek to tackle refugee crisis. New traffic marshals. The NYS to take over traffic control in Nairobi next year. New home for dumped donkeys. Donkeys dumped in Nairobi Central Business District find a new home. And the ICC on Darfur. ICC prosecutor Fatou Bensouda suspends investigations into war crimes in Sudan's Darfur region. Good evening. Now, the Kenyan government is now planning on reducing the number of refugees and asylum seekers in the country to boost the war against terror. If passed, proposals in the Security Laws Amendment Bill will see the number of refugees in the country cut down to only 150,000. Here's more on that story.
With the hope of sealing loopholes in the country's security system, the government has now resolved to limiting the number of refugees and asylum seekers through the Security Laws Amendment Bill 2014. The bill, introduced in Parliament barely a week ago, has been subject of discussion since then, with many stating that it will undermine various freedoms for both Kenyans and outsiders.
Without creating a new law, we rationalize existing legislation to enable the country meet the challenges of our time. In conducting this urgently, necessary processes and no freedoms are being curtailed. And I want to repeat that. No freedoms are being curtailed unless, of course, you're a terrorist yourself.
The bill, fronted by the Parliamentary Committee on Administration and National Security, proposes that the number of refugees or asylum seekers permitted to stay in Kenya shall not exceed 150,000. A number cut down by more than 3/4 to the number of refugees hosted in the country. Data by United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees shows that the number of refugees in Kenya stood at over 500,000. However, the National Assembly has been given powers in the bill to vary the number, but that is only applicable for a period exceeding 6 months. Critics say the bill undermines human rights as conflicts in neighboring countries like South Sudan and Somalia continue to displace thousands of people who find solace in Kenya. However, the government sees the entrance of refugees and asylum seekers in the country as one of the avenues used by terrorists to get into the country. Most of the refugees are hosted in Dadaab and Kakuma camps. The bill also seeks to establish mandatory profiling of tenants by landlords and sets tough rules of issuing work permits to investors. This follows previous reports that terrorists have been able to rent flats from where they planned attacks. If passed as currently published, the freedom of expression, the right to privacy, and freedom of the media will be affected.
The National Youth Service will from February next year be engaged in traffic control in Nairobi City. The deployment is part of a government's comprehensive youth transformative plan.
The National Youth Service has been undergoing a transformation to make it a better institution for youth empowerment. Apart from engaging in community service like the ongoing cleanup exercise in Kibera slum, the service will be deployed as traffic marshals in Nairobi. Devolution Cabinet Secretary Anne Waiguru, while briefing Ghanaian President John Mahama, who toured the National Youth Service headquarters, said NYS will be the main actor in youth empowerment as a key driver to development. Waiguru said 21,870,000 young people will be recruited to the NYS and in turn mentor 227,660 others annually. They will be organized in groups of 15. President Mahama, who is on state visit in the country, was conducted on the tour by his host, President Uhuru Kenyatta.
Now, President Uhuru Kenyatta and his Ghanaian counterpart John Dramani Mahama today witnessed the signing of 9 bilateral agreements to deepen the economic and political ties between the two nations. The agreements signed between the two countries include bilateral air services and cooperation in energy, oil and gas sectors. Now, the two countries also signed a deal on tourism and another on technical, vocational education and training, TVET reforms. Memorandums of understanding in the fields of agriculture and ICT were also entered into. President Uhuru Kenyatta said the agreements that were signed will increase trade between the two countries and called on investors to take advantage of the agreements.
The international community.
We have before us today, you and I, a number of issues that reflect our collective quest for a new African renaissance, enhanced trade and economic activities, a commitment to peace, and the growth of not only our individual countries and sub-regions, but also of our entire continent, and perhaps most urgently, a commitment to the elimination of any activities that foment trouble for our people, such as terrorism and war.
I note with satisfaction the increased engagement between our two governments, which has culminated in the signing of a number of legal frameworks during this visit. These will serve to further enhance mutually beneficial economic, political and cultural exchanges between our two countries.
Now, moving on, the over 20 donkeys that were dumped in Nairobi earlier this week by people who are said to be protesters have now found a new home in an animal rescue home. Ebru Africa News reporter Agnes Gakunga visited the home and had more on that story.
On Tuesday this week, Nairobi's Central Business District received rare guests. 22 donkeys with graffiti painted on them. They were abandoned by a driver of a lorry. The driver said he was hired by a man who asked him to deliver the animals to the city center. The 22 donkeys, branded to Mechoka, meaning we are tired, were dumped and left to wander along the streets. All of them have found a new home.
We basically arrested that lorry and the driver, and we used him to transport the donkeys from town to the KSPCA, which is a temporary holding area where the donkeys are going to be held until a time when we'll find new homes for them. While the driver now and the lorry are in the police custody, following further investigation to find the root of this situation and where the donkeys came from, whether the donkeys were bought or stolen, all those things, until we find what was really happening.
Here they are fed and taken care of. It is believed that some activists ferried the donkeys and the animals were meant to send a message that Kenyans are tired of rising cost of living and insecurity.
And now to the corridors of justice. The International Criminal Court prosecutor Plateau Bensouda says she has suspended her investigation into war crimes in Sudan's Darfur region because of lack of action by the United Nations. Bensouda said there needed to be a dramatic shift in the UN Security Council's approach.
The International Criminal Court prosecutor Plateau Bensouda told the Security Council it was becoming increasingly difficult for her to appear before it for updates, yet nothing was being done. Bensouda says she will now focus her energy to other urgent cases. The Hague-based court indicted Sudanese President Omar al-Bashir in 2009 for alleged war crimes, but he remains at large and has refused to recognize the court's authority. Other Sudanese officials have been charged by the ICC, but none has been arrested. Darfur has been in conflict since 2003 when rebels took up arms. Analysts say action by the Security Council is unlikely because China, which wields a veto, has traditionally supported Sudan. Last month, Sudan asked the UN African Union force in Darfur, UNAMID, to close its human rights office in the capital, Khartoum. The move came amid tension over the mission's attempt to investigate claims of mass rape by Sudanese troops in the Darfur village of Tabit. Sudan says it carried out its own investigation and had found no proof that anyone was raped.
Let's now move to Nigeria, where at least 40 people were killed on Thursday following two explosions that rocked Jos in central Nigeria in what appeared to be the latest attack by extremists. Activists said that the blast occurred as store owners were shutting their shops in the downtown. One blast went off at an outdoor food stand called Mr. Biggs and the other at the nearby entrance to the Terminus Market in the center of the city, according to witnesses who spoke on condition of anonymity for fear of reprisals. According to a civil rights lawyer at the scene, rescue workers had evacuated 31 bodies and operations were continuing. Several people were said to have been injured in the explosions, while others were critically injured. Plateau State Police Commissioner Nasir Oke said that two female suicide bombers were responsible for the blasts.
Two suicide bombers came to Terminus Market, detonated their IEDs, which was trapped in their body. Believably, they are women.
There was no immediate claim of responsibility for Thursday's bombings, but suspicion fell on Boko Haram militia. Several bombs in recent months have been detonated by female suicide bombers, raising fears that Boko Haram is using some of the hundreds of kidnapped girls and young women for its attacks. Thousands of people have died and 1.2 million have been forced from their homes in the 5-year-old insurgency. Moving on, South African President Jacob Zuma hosted a celebratory dinner with South Africa's veteran artists. The president awarded them certificates in a gala dinner in recognition of their role and contribution in the country's struggle. As part of the 20 years of democracy celebrations, the South African Department of Arts and Culture held a dinner to celebrate veterans in the creative industry for their contribution in the struggle for South Africa's liberation.
The creative industry sector has contributed immensely to both the struggle for liberation and also the period of reconstruction and development of our country. Your pens, voices, painting, brushes, instruments, dance, and films told the story of our dreams, the dream of a free, united, non-racial, non-sexist, and prosperous South Africa.
The Magal of Tuba is an annual pilgrimage to the tomb of Amadou Bamba in that city's great mosque. It is the major annual event of the Murid movement, which has become a Senegalese national event commemorating Amadou Bamba's return from exile under the French colonial government. Take a look.
The Magal is the commemoration of the exile in Gabon of Sheikh Amadou Bamba of Senegal, the founder of Mouridism. This is a great event which attracts religious pilgrims from all over the world. This year they celebrate the 120th edition of the Grand Magal of Tuba. The beliefs and practices of the Moraids constitute Mouridism. The Moraid Brotherhood was founded in 1883 in Senegal by Amadou Bamba. The Mourid make up around a sixth of the total population in Senegal. The influence over everyday life can be seen throughout the country. Amadou Bamba was buried in 1927 at the Great Mosque in Touba, Senegal, the holy city of Mouridism and the heart of the Moraid movement. After his death, Bamba has been succeeded by his descendants as hereditary leaders of the Brotherhood with absolute authority over the followers.
It is one of the more important events for the Mourid community in Senegal. The Brotherhood of Mourid in the city of Touba are founded by Sheikh Amadou Bamba. Sheikh Amadou Bamba is considered to be a renewal of Islam during the colonialism by his followers. Reporting for Ebru Africa in Senegal, I am Landslide.
Let's now move over to matters environment. The United Nations climate talks are headed for a watered-down deal on limiting global warming after rich and poor nations failed to agree on how to share the burden of curbing rising world emissions and how to raise a promised $100 billion a year by 2020 to help the poor cope with a warmer world. The talks held in Peru rain on into an extra day on Saturday. Rich and poor nations were at odds after 2 weeks of talks in Peru over how to share the burden of curbing rising world emissions and how to raise a promised $100 billion a year by 2020 to help the poor cope with a warmer world. The deadlock has resulted to the abandonment of the toughest issues for next year's summit to be held in Paris. Peruvian Environment Minister Manuel Pulgar Vidal, hosting the talks, told the delegates that a new text on Saturday morning to try to break impasses was not perfect but reflected common ground. Lima is meant to establish the building blocks of a new global deal to limit climate change to be agreed at a UN summit in Paris in December 2015. But many of the most contentious issues remain to be decided. China, the biggest greenhouse gas emitter, has resisted any scrutiny of its policy to cap its emissions by around 2030. Delegates said despite hopes of more openness after a pact last month with the United States to limit warming. The new draft text expressed grave concern that all promises to fight climate change were too lax to reach a goal of limiting global warming to an agreed goal of 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial times. It laid out detailed ways for nations to submit their domestic plans for fighting climate change beyond 2020 to the United Nations by an informal deadline of March 31, 2015 to help lay the groundwork for a Paris Accord. It dropped a key demand by many developing nations to discuss compensation for loss and damage from climate change, such as from typhoons or rising sea levels. Now, airports around the UK have been returning to normal, although almost 40 flights were cancelled at Heathrow the day after a computer failed at the National Air Traffic Control Centre. National Air Traffic Services said a technical fault in the flight data system at its Swanwick Centre in Hampshire had caused the problem.
London's Heathrow Airport on Saturday cancelled more flights the day after a computer glitch at an air traffic control centre led to a major disruption of air traffic in and out of London. Some 38 flights out of the 1,300 were cancelled as airlines dealt with the knock-on effects of the shutdown. That shutdown led to planes and flight crews being out of position. Heathrow, Europe's busiest airport, put extra staff on duty in hopes of getting stranded passengers in the air. Gatwick, another major London airport south of the capital, said flights were departing but with delays. Stansted Airport, the city's third busiest, also said in a tweet that departing flights were resuming. It was the second such incident involving the centre at Swanwick in southern England in just over a year. Last December, thousands of travellers were delayed at major airports across England when the night operating system at Swanwick failed to switch over to daytime mode.
Rescuers are struggling to reach more than 100 people missing after a landslide triggered by torrential winds buried houses in a hilly district on Indonesia's main island of Java. Seasonal downpours cause frequent landslides and flash floods in Indonesia each year.
At least 11 people were killed and scores injured when about 105 houses were swept away by mud, gushing into Jemblang village in Banjarnegara district of Central Java province. Hours later, hundreds of rescuers, including police, soldiers and residents, continued to search through the debris for signs of the 107 people still missing. Disaster agency officials said rescue teams had taken about 40 people to hospital, of whom 4 were said to be in critical condition. The country's national disaster agency said hundreds of houses had been destroyed by the landslide. Flash floods and landslides are common in Indonesia, triggered by seasonal downpours. Many of the inhabitants of the chain of 17,000 islands live in mountainous areas or near fertile floodplains.
Now, Ebro Africa's news reporter Brenda Zede today tied the knot with Roy Radido Okech in a colorful wedding ceremony at the Nairobi Pentecostal Church in Karen.
I, Brenda Zede, take you.
It was glitz and glamour in Brenda Zede's big day as she finally said I do to longtime boyfriend Roy Radido Okech. A cheerful Brenda could not hide her joy as she walked down the aisle in a church filled with the family and friends who had come to witness the two unite in holy matrimony. And from the Ebro TV family, we wish Mr. and Mrs. Radido Okech a blessed and happy marriage. Well, that colorful story wraps up our bulletin. Many thanks for joining us on Ebro Africa Saturday Primetime News. Join us tomorrow for another comprehensive bulletin. I am Akisa Wandera. Have a good night and keep it Ebro Africa TV.